Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to our annual Constitution Day lecture. The Honors College is so happy to host tonight Dr. Wilfred McClay from Hillsdale University. Dr. McClay joins a very prestigious line of speakers who have spoken at our annual Constitution Day, the Honors College's longest running annual lecture. Constitution Day celebrates the signing of the United States Constitution on September 17th, 1787, at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. It concluded 4 months of debate among many of the most prestigious and intelligent men in our country, with the hope of designing a constitution that would survive for the ages, rooted in a realistic understanding of human nature. And as of today, the United States remains the oldest written constitution currently in existence. Today's lecture is very generously supported by the Jack Miller Center in Philadelphia. And I want to thank Tom Cleveland and his associates at Jack Miller for continuing to support the Abbey. Due to the support of the Jack Miller Center, we will have a lecture series next semester on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And I'm very happy to note that one of those 2 lecturers will be Justin Dyer from the University of Texas at Austin. The Honors College curriculum and Belmont Abbey College is dedicated to responsible civic education. In the traditional core at Belmont Abbey, students take a class in American government. In the honors curriculum, students study the ancient Republican thinkers during their first year. In their second year, they take a class on the American founding. In their third year, they study the Roman plays of Shakespeare, which address this theme of statesmanship. And in their final year, they take a course on Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. So one of the pillars of the honors curriculum is a deep and abiding belief that in order to have a structured society, there has to be responsible and informed citizenship. Dr. Wilfred McClay holds the Victor Davis Hanson Chair in Classical History and Western Civilization at Hillsdale College. Among his several books are The Master Class, Self and Society in Modern America, The Student's Guide to U.S. History, Why Place Matters, Geography, Identity, and Public Life in Modern America, and the book he is perhaps most known for, Land of Hope, an invitation to the great American story, which is quickly becoming one of the most important high school textbooks in American history, for American history. He served for 11 years on the National Council on the Humanities, the Advisory Board for the National Endowment for the Humanities. He is a graduate of St. John's College in Annapolis, and he received his PhD in history from Johns Hopkins University. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a loud Crusader welcome to Dr. McClay.
Crusader welcome. Thank you. We're on a crusade. Okay. Thank you very much. And it's wonderful to be here. I've been here many times in association with various programs, but it's been a while. It's been too long, and I'm really happy to be back here, and very happy to be back here for Constitution Day, even though Constitution Day was September 17th, you know, we're just going to extend the party a little bit. My topic is the Constitution's place in civic education, which has been alluded to as one of the missions of the Honors College, and it should be a mission for all American education. But I want to start off my talk in a somewhat surprising place, maybe a strange place to start a lecture on Constitution Day. I'd like to begin by talking about the late and great Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom. Queen Elizabeth II ranks as the longest reigning monarch in British history. She's easily passed the 63-year rule of Queen Victoria, continued to add to her numbers until her death almost exactly 3 years ago, September 2022, at the ripe young age of 96. Earlier that same year, she celebrated the platinum anniversary of her ascension to the throne, 70 years as queen. Technically, Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, had a longer reign than her, but that's only if you count the period of his regency, 18 years before he was a grown-up. And Elizabeth, on the other hand, was helping out her father as he was dying, even before ascending to the throne. So in my book, she holds the record, and I'm sticking to that. So just as we have the longest reigning constitution, the Queen Elizabeth is the longest reigning monarch, and I'm going to follow that analogy out. Elizabeth's achievement was widely remarked upon, celebrated in the American press and other media. We Americans seem to have a great fondness for her and for the British royal family, or at least an interest, if not always fondness. That affection toward Elizabeth in particular has been stirred lately, as some of you may have heard, that it's emerged that Elizabeth and her husband, Prince Philip, were early admirers of Charlie Kirk, and they supported his efforts in the United Kingdom to stir up a religious revival and started an organization called, I kid you not, Turning Point UK, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. So Queen Elizabeth was a backer of that. But really, why do we care about her? Doesn't it seem a little strange to be a strange behavior for a country that came into being in a bloody revolution against one of her predecessors? Not to mention being a country whose constitution, the 238th anniversary of which we've just celebrated on September 17th, that constitution incorporates the principle that there'll be no title of nobility granted by the United States, and that every state in the Union would have a republican form of government. Republican meaning no kings and queens allowed. Well, there are probably more elements to this puzzle than time would allow us to discuss, but surely part of the answer lies in the affinity, the bonds that link our two nations still in the form of shared language, customs, laws, and culture. Our country may have been born in rebellion, but our Constitution's forms and contents are deeply indebted to the British influences that shaped it, especially following the long and often bloody struggles for power during the 17th century, in which the supremacy of Parliament over the monarch was established. More generally, the special relationship, so-called, between our two nations has proven to be deep and enduring, despite our occasional differences. There's no doubt about it. Americans have a rooting interest in the well-being of British monarchs of the past 2 centuries. But there's something else at work, too. The Queen's most important role in her own country was an impersonal one, her office as a symbol of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. Those of you who've seen the television series called The Crown, anybody here seen it? Yeah, a few people. I wouldn't watch all of it. It turns into a soap opera, but the first year is very good. It's about the life of Elizabeth. And if you've seen this, one of the things you really appreciate is the sacrifices, the price that she paid over the course of her whole life to be that symbol, to play that role, which she did with superlative grace. I think she was arguably the single most compelling symbol of political stability and unity in the post-World War II world. The world still seems diminished by her absence. We Americans often feel the absence of unifying personal symbols in our own contentious nation. And many of us yearn for them, especially at the present moment, when so much in our national life seems to be fiercely contested, and in which the presidency itself, no matter who occupies the office, seems to be more of a source of division than a source of abiding unity. Seeming to lack the symbols of unity, we fear we may be losing unity itself, and that's not an unjustified fear. But in fact, we do not lack for unifying symbols if we're willing to avail ourselves of them. Ever since George Washington gallantly refused the office of monarch, we've been on a different path, a path in which our commitment to impersonal laws and impartial procedures overrides our commitment to any one man or woman as our symbolic head. For us, it is a document, our Constitution, that plays the role of democratic monarch for us and serves as the chief and most durable symbol of our national unity and our commitment to one another as one nation. This is not a new idea. It was already being pointed toward by Thomas Paine in his wildly popular and influential revolutionary pamphlet of 1776, Common Sense. Listen to his words. But where, say some, is the King of America? I'll tell you, friend, he reigns above and does not make havoc of mankind like the royal brute of Britain. That's George III, the royal brute of Britain. Yet that we may not appear to be defective even in earthly honors, let a day solemnly be set apart for proclaiming the charter. Let it be brought forth, placed on the divine law, the word of God. Let the crown be placed thereon, by which the world may know that so far as we approve of monarchy, that in America the law is king. For as in absolute governments the king is law, so in free countries the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other. So that's why we celebrate Constitution Day. We don't put a crown on the Constitution. Maybe we could. This kind of symbolic headship, sovereignty, after all, it's representative of the sovereignty of the people. That's not all that the Constitution does for us. It's first and foremost a legal document, written expression of the supreme law of the land. It establishes the fundamental structure of the national government. It delineates the relationship of the national government to the state governments. It explicitly protects certain individual and collective rights over against the power of the national government. As such, it is not in any obvious way equal to a monarch. And like most legal documents, it's a rather dry affair. Unlike the Declaration of Independence, and apart from its preamble, it contains very little by way of soaring language or inspiring narratives proclaiming the sweeping character of its claims. But its symbolic function is absolutely crucial, a crucial part of what it has been for us and continues to be for us. We've lived under its authority for the entire span of our nation's history, apart from a brief prelude under the Articles of Confederation. Hence, our national identity is difficult to conceive apart from it. To do so would mean entry into utterly uncharted waters. You might say uncharted waters. Not a very good pun, though. By contrast, the French are always a great contrast. The French, good food, great wines. The French have been through the centuries, gone through a multitude of regimes, monarchies, republics, 5 of them at last count, empires, and yet the French national identity has never been reliant upon any particular form of government. We think of the United States as a young country, and perhaps we're right to do so, but the established life of the American nation has never existed apart from its Constitution, which, as has been pointed out, happens to be the world's oldest written constitution. Hence, it's especially proper at times of intense conflict, intense disagreement, intense contention in our national life that we pause and remember and reflect on the meaning of that fact, that we have the world's oldest constitution and we have never existed apart from it. That, of course, doesn't mean the Constitution and its longevity has always been seen by everybody as a cause for celebration. This is America. Nobody agrees about everything. There have always been detractors, impatient with the impediments to change that are built into the constitutional structure. One of our most distinguished founders, Thomas Jefferson, was often dismissive of the Constitution's importance. And he mocked those who, I quote, look at constitutions with sanctimonious reverence and deem them like the Ark of the Covenant, ascribing to the men of the preceding age a wisdom more than human. Well, he wasn't entirely wrong to take this attitude. The Constitution should never be treated as the equivalent of sacred scripture. And its framers never intended that it should be. But Jefferson was wrong to disparage our instinct to venerate the Constitution. And the fact that we've amended it so many ways since his time doesn't change matters. We need our sprightly 230-year-old Constitution now more than ever. We need it primarily as a foundational charter of our liberties and our organizational plan for a limited government. But we also need it as an anchor for our national life, a focal point of legitimacy in times of conflict, an educational instrument that demonstrates to those who live under it the kinds of restraint that are required of a free people living under the rule of law, the ways that the wants and desires of free citizens can be directed so as to make possible a good and orderly society. It's striking how often in the course of American history, in times of crisis, our national debates have revolved around rival interpretations of the Constitution, of what it actually says. The right interpretation may be in doubt. It may be a point of dispute. But the necessity of looking at the Constitution and looking to the Constitution for vindication of whatever interpretation one offers is nearly always presumed. Everybody always wants to be on the right side of the Constitution, even if it takes a little bit of effort to get it there. As such, the Constitution must stand at the center of any civic education, the education of citizens, that's worthy of the name. A model whose example is felt in all the activities of American citizenship. It's admittedly far less charming and personable than Queen Elizabeth II. I promise I'm not going to say anything more about her. I've got a crush on her, I admit it, and we'll let it go. And the Constitution lends itself poorly to occasions of pomp and ceremony, unlike you-know-who. But it has proved far more durable than any queen or king, and its health is the key to our continued unity and prosperity as a people. It remains our only king, just as Thomas Paine said it was. And by the way, just in case some smart person out there is going to say it, I'll say it first. when Paine wrote that in 1776. It was before the Constitution had been written. But the general principles he's enunciating are the principles of American republicanism that were very much in evidence at the Constitutional Convention. So now I come to the subject of civic education and the Constitution's role in it. Civic education, what is civic education? What does it do? It serves the function of binding us to that document, showing us the secrets behind its power, learning about the complex structure of the federal and state government, coming to understand the elaborate system of checks and balances that thwarts the natural tendency towards excessive concentration of power. To do this doesn't have to be a dry exercise in rote memorization. It's a kind of drama. Understood rightly, in fact, it's nothing less than a profound reflection on human nature, on what kinds of creatures we are, just as James Madison said that it was. It conveys the hard truth that, given the flawed timber of human nature, a free and good society will also be a contentious society in which interests inevitably conflict with one another and collide together, and in which lawful rules of engagement for the channeling of conflict are absolutely necessary. Now, not everyone agrees with this. One of the arguments that's constantly advanced against the centrality of the Constitution today is the fact of the social pluralism of our time. In this view, an 18th century document designed for the governance of a relatively small, homogeneous, largely agrarian society of white Protestant English speakers could not possibly be adequate to the far more complex, increasingly diverse society that we find ourselves in today. What can the Constitution tell us about how to deal with issues like internet hacking or identity theft or the rights of surrogate parents? Or more generally, how does the Constitution, the study of the Constitution, help us think concretely about problems of which the framers could not possibly even have dreamed? And this argument can be extended even further. Perhaps the idea that there's a unified American national identity is itself a delusion. Perhaps we're just too diverse today to think of ourselves in that way any longer. If so, then civic education shouldn't concern itself with inculcating and reinforcing a national commonality that no longer exists. Instead, in this argument, it should concern itself with the empowerment of sub-communities and marginalized groups as a means of expanding the reach of a more truly democratic ethos, a more perfect union, as it says in the preamble. Teaching the citizenry about theories and structures of government, in this view, is a waste of time. As the political theorist Peter Levine argues, the essence of citizenship is activity. The citizen is a person who asks the question, what should we do? And who then mobilizes to do it. But this argument of Levine's presumes a lot, doesn't it? It presumes in the first place that nothing is to be learned from the past, from referring present-day dilemmas to older constitutional principles and categories. But that certainly is not true. If anything, referring backward can be a great source of illumination, precisely because it forces us to reconsider the particulars of a problem within a larger context, one that brings together a wealth of prior experience. Questions of internet security are clarified by reference to the principles of the Fourth Amendment. Issues of big tech censorship are usefully developed by asking whether or not Google or Facebook or X are, quote, common carriers in the common law sense of the term. We're forced to consider present-day instances in light of more enduring, even perennial features of human relations. Very few things in life are entirely new and lack any grounding in previous experience. The argument also presupposes that there is a sufficient cultural homogeneity in present-day American society to achieve meaningful consensus about what it means to say that something should be done, and that one acts lawfully in doing it. But Levine errs, I fear, in saying the question, what should be done, is an empirical question. He errs in saying that. Should is not an empirical term. It necessarily implies that there's some prior conception of the moral universe that influences the course of action. The art of deliberation, too, is impossible without a whole set of prior commitments to principles of integrity and reason and mutuality that don't arise spontaneously in human beings, to put it mildly, but require education in shared values to be inculcated well in advance of the art of the act of deliberating. The pragmatistic premises of action civics, another approach to civic education that Levine supports, are different. They presume civic education is kinetic. I love that word, kinetic. You can get away with anything by calling it kinetic. And what it means here is that you can learn to deliberate by the act of deliberating. Learn to make political judgments by the act of making political judgments. See how simple it is. But one cannot deliberate or judge until one has possession of the moral tools to do so. And knowledge independently acquired so that you can make dispassionate and rational judgments. Otherwise, all you'll be doing is engaging in political action based entirely on what others tell you that you should be doing. When high school students, to get a specific example that Peter Levine favors, when high school students are urged to participate in public demonstrations on behalf of complex issues, climate change, open borders, tax policy, abortion rights, the proper role of the police, about which they cannot possibly have made an independent and informed judgment, that's exactly what's happening. They're being a cheap labor supply, exploited rather than educated. And this is a mockery of civic education. In case I haven't made myself clear, I'm against it. The question of cultural diversity, too, can lead in a very different direction than the exponents of new civics would take it. Samuel Goldwyn argues in a very interesting book, and after nationalism, being American in an age of division, that we have so many obstacles to a revived sense of national identity. We should just give up on that and instead make stronger what he calls our institutions of contestation, foremost of which, of course, is the Constitution itself, along with the institutions it created, the court systems, other judicial bodies, rather than chase the phantom of a more cohesive culture in which people have things in common. In other words, to simplify his argument, give the people sparring rings to fight out their differences, rather than trying to iron out those differences through civic education. There's something to this, too, that it is valuable to have a firm commitment to the institutional procedures of contestation, the rules of evidence, right to counsel, all that stuff, without insisting in advance on a particular substantive outcome. This could be a minimal basis for holding a pluralistic society together. But how minimal? How much is enough? How can such unquestioned respect for our procedures be maintained unless the Constitution itself is something to be venerated, something that brings respect to the government and contributes to its stability and endurance? This podium is moving. A living Constitution with a living podium. Well, the Constitution's framers seem inclined to agree with what I just said about the importance of veneration. Consider these words of James Madison in Federalist 25. Wise politicians know that every breach of the fundamental laws, though dictated by necessity, impairs that sacred reverence, there's that word, which ought to be maintained in the breast of rulers towards the Constitution of a country, and forms a precedent for other breaches where the same plea of necessity does not exist. It all is less urgent. Well, if Madison's right, the dignity of the law should be understood as a seamless web for which an unattended tear in one area, especially of the highest and most general law, can present a general lack of confidence in the law's efficacy and worthiness. A loss of reverence for the highest law in the land cannot help but undermine the way law and lawful behavior are understood on other levels. It would undermine the efficacy and authority of these institutions of contestation. So I don't think we should be ready to go along with this thin, sparring ring understanding of what it means to be American. It's unfortunate that the word citizenship has lost much of the noble luster it once had, even when I was young. Just as civics has wound up being demoted to a kind of user's guide to the machinery of government. Both words deserve better. Citizenship is not merely about voting, but also about achieving and claiming membership in a society of civic equals. Citizens, not subjects. This was a rallying cry of the revolution. Citizens, not subjects. Whose respects for one another's equal standing under the law is a guiding moral premise in the democratic way of life. Civic education, rightly understood, then extends far beyond the mechanics of how a bill becomes a law. It should promote a vivid and enduring sense of our belonging to one of the greatest enterprises in human history, the astonishing and immensely consequential story of our own country. Both things involve fostering that sense of felt connection to our past. Hence, a civic education is more than a guidebook for practical action, more than an initiation into a canon of ideas, although it should be both of those things. It is an initiation into a community, and not just a community of the present, focused on what we should do now, but also a community of memory, a long human chain linking past, present, and future in shared recognition, and one hopes in gratitude. Ultimately, then, although this is wildly unfashionable for me to say so, fasten your seatbelts, a civic education should be an education in love. The love in question, needless to say, is something different from romantic love or familial love or any other kind of love. And although we need to find ways to teach it, at the same time, it can't be imposed by teachers or schools or government edicts, least of all in a free country. It must be embraced freely and be strong and mature enough to coexist with elements of disappointment, criticism, dissent, opposition, and even shame that come with moral maturity. But it is love all the same. Love can coexist perfectly well with a critical acknowledgement of faults and imperfections. Do we not see this same coexistence every day in many, if not all, of our most important relationships with other people? Those of the people in the audience who are married know exactly what I'm talking about. The highest love is not blind. But without encouraging the development of love for the nation, there will be less and less willingness on the part of citizens to sacrifice for the invisible and anonymous others making up the nation. Whether those sacrifices are made on the field of battle or in a more equitable provision of health care or the formulation of welfare policy. We already can see the development of an entitlement mentality which sees government merely as a vending machine for benefits, a dispenser of funds. Without the deeper foundation that love and memory supply, a people's sacrificial capacity will soon be exhausted and their republic will perish. History must be based on truth and not on myth. We do ourselves and our young no favors by prettifying or oversimplifying our past and failing to give an honest account of our failures as well as our triumphs. Nor do we do them a favor by presenting the Constitution to them all by itself and alone as a rather dry and unapproachable legal document. No, they need supplements to it. They need to be able to understand the context in which the Constitution arose, the specific political problems it aimed to solve, the conflicts it mediated, the goods it seeks to protect. That's precisely why the tangled, conflicted, and imperfect history of our Constitution and of the constitutional law arising out of myriad federal court cases can be such a valuable way of imparting civic knowledge. It forces us to wrestle with some of America's worst moments. Think of some of the most regrettable court decisions, such as Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson, or Roe versus Wade, and how they've been corrected. In doing so, it is cultivating the mindset and habits necessary to Republican citizenship. But we also do ourselves no favor and do the young no favor, or no favor to the truth, if we fail to honor the magnificent achievements of our history and leave them out of the accounting entirely, as has become too often the case in instruction and history, both on the K-12 level and in higher education. We need to remember that one of the chief civic functions of history, one of the chief reasons we try to record the past and remember it and teach it to the young, is as a vessel of shared memory, imparting to each generation a sense of membership in its own society, a sense of living connection to its own past, one that can unite us and sustain us in hard times. And so can it be for us today. I believe our young people, you in the audience, and in schools all over the country, deserve nothing less. Properly understood civics involves us in a consideration of human nature itself and of what is the best set of arrangements to cope with the human condition as we find it. And it teaches us about our relationship and indebtedness to the past. It seeks to instill in us a sense of continuity with generations gone before. And by doing so, begins the process, which is a process of maturation, of locating one's life in a meaning larger than oneself. An approach to civics that's relentlessly pragmatic and political and present-minded and fails to draw upon the treasure of our unifying symbols, notably that of the Constitution, will fail to engender those things. It will only serve to reinforce the short-sightedness that we already have in abundance, and we don't need any more of that. Thank you very much. How much? 10 minutes? As long as you want. They're going to take questions for me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll do about 10 minutes of Q&A. Because this is being filmed, if you want to ask a question, you're going to have to do it through the microphone. So is there anyone who would like to ask the first question? All right, Lydia Ryan, out in the back.
You guys are great.
Hi, thank you so much. I was wondering, so the Constitution, I don't know, for things like the Dred Scott decision, it seems really kind of problematic since it's not very well equipped to make moral decisions, since we can't be affiliated with a religion, and it's just you go off of what the Constitution says. So how do you make sure that what you do is not just politically but also morally correct?
Oh, well, there's only so much that a written document can do to enforce morality in the times and situations beyond where it's produced. I mean, I think, and look, the Constitution actually has, in a sense, compared to what you're asking for, rather modest aims. I think it's if I could make a crude analogy, I mean, not crude, but anyway, characterize it how you like. Let's compare it to playing football. You would, to have a football game, to have a contest, you establish rules. Hopefully the rules are clear. They're not always that clear in football, but we'll leave that aside. You can ensure that a game is played fairly. You can't ensure the best team will win or the most deserving team will win. What you can do is to put in place a framework of rules that govern the play that goes on in the field. But you can't make those rules determine the outcome that you want to see. What you can do over time is one of the things we do in our court systems, we have an elaborate system of appellate courts that allow bad decisions to be, and we're seeing a lot of this lately, to be overturned by the Supreme Court or by federal district courts or circuit courts. You have layers of accountability within the structure. That's part of what checks and balances are, is a way of not just different branches of government being willful and saying, just because you want this, we're not going to let you have it. It's a form of accountability within the political system. But that can only do so much. And with Dred Scott, I mean, you had the Dred Scott is a subset of a whole series of things that I think you could say was a failure of the Constitution. I'd be willing to say that Civil War and the regression of the country into division and armed conflict was a failure of the Constitution. So the Constitution is not a perfect mechanism to ensure the right moral outcomes. What you hope is over time, with the refining power of repeated decisions coming before the courts that either have to affirm or challenge the validity of previous decisions, and eventually the more just view will prevail. But it's admittedly it's not foolproof. We've had many fools, and we're not proof against them. But I'd say one more comment about Dred Scott. I mean, the problem, the Chief Justice Taney, who wrote the opinion, he thought that he could write an opinion from the Supreme Court that would resolve the whole slavery question. And of course, what he did was a terrible, misguided, really awful, despicable in many ways decision that did not solve the problem but exacerbated it and caused Abraham Lincoln, among other things, that was what drove Lincoln back into politics because of his outrage over the Kansas-Nebraska Act and various other things. But when the courts try to do too much, these other examples I gave, Roe, when they try to do too much, when they try to settle an issue, and for a long time the Supreme Court made rulings upholding Roe versus Wade by saying, look, it's going to, basically their argument was it's going to undermine the authority of the court if we reverse ourselves, even if it's the right thing to do. And then finally, they just sort of screwed up their courage and reversed themselves. That's my reading of the narrative. So we have to have confidence that over time things are improvable, even if in the short term something like Dred Scott happens.
All right, we're going to have a question from a 13-week child. So here we go.
This is a 2-for-1, so I'm going to speak on my son's behalf. He would like to know, he's heard some rumors about America, and that on one hand, it seems like there's been a progressive critique historically of the United States, 1619 project, throw it away, it's been corrupt from the founding. But increasingly, I think that's coming from the right as well, which is something more like, well, the founders are a bunch of Freemasons, everything is corrupt from the beginning, it's basically a cabal. I'm wondering what you make of that phenomenon, that like there's a certain narrative coming from the right now that sort of says America's just bad, and what historically, or how would you respond to that, and where do you think that's coming from, and what does a robust view of history look like? That's all he wanted to know.
Wow, you've got your hands full. I mean, imagine what kinds of questions he's going to be asking 10 years from now. Are you ready for this? I'm disappointed in some. I'm actually disappointed in the progressives too. I think this notion that the founding was flawed from the beginning. It's been around for a long time, actually, and on the right. Is I just leave? Oh, I can't. Am I going in and out? I have the sense I'm going in and out. Okay. I get it. Yeah, I need to be near the modem. Okay. Is that better? Okay. I'll try not to wander. My thoughts are wandering. I think the right. Look, one way of answering your question is that the right is something different from conservatism. And to be conservative is partly a situational thing. It's an opposition to change, to dramatic, revolutionary, radical change in particular instances. And also, if you look at our authors like Russell Kirk, there are sort of certain principles of conservatism that he enunciates. I think most conservatives would go along with. I'm not sure the right, which is actually a very hard term to define, the right, but I think the right is not necessarily conservative. There are definitely people on the right and people who consider themselves conservative who also have a sort of burn it down attitude toward a lot of what has come to be part of the political establishment, and that it is, the administrative state is extra constitutional in character, and it should be eliminated. And I actually have a lot of sympathy for that. I think that the administrative state, the parts of the executive branch that are not accountable to the electoral process are really a great infringement on the fundamental Republican character of our way of life and our government. I think the best thing to do is to try not to operate on the basis of labels. I know that sounds kind of wimpy to say that, but to take the arguments as they come. I think there are good arguments made by establishment people. Philip Hamburger, the Columbia Law School, is the best person on the subject of the administrative state. And if you're a member of the Columbia Law School faculty, you're probably not an Antifa member. Not that they're on the right, but you know what I'm saying. So I think there are non-radical, non-alt-right kinds of ways of understanding criticisms that come from that direction that might have some validity, but they may need to be moderated and toned down. I don't know whether I'm really answering your question. I also don't know how many of these people there are. There's a way in which the extent of a movement can be magnified by the internet and by the kind of digital sort of amplification that comes. And there may not be that many people who actually pull the lever on Tuesday in November for that kind of policy change. So there's always people who, in times of conflict, there's always going to be people who are attracted to extremes, and sometimes for good reason. But we shouldn't, I think, peddle that kind of politics, at least in higher education. I think we should be supportive of measures that work within the institutions that we've been given, because they're good institutions. And in many ways, I would say the Constitution has not failed, we have failed it. And I could go on about that for a while. The Congress has for a long time now been failing to perform its constitutional duties. And exactly what to do about that, I'm not sure. But I don't think abolishing the Constitution, as some people on the left and the right suggest, is the solution to it.
All right, next up is Thomas Hudson.
Doctor, thank you for your lecture. So the ancients spoke of the law as a teacher. The people,
I need a little louder.
My apologies.
You
Is this
sound like a
better?
late night FM DJ.
There, it's better.
Now we're
there
going
we
to
go.
play.
So the ancients spoke of the law as a teacher of the people, and you spoke of the Constitution as the sort of monarch, right? And that comes with this sort of instructive role to tell the American people about who we are, both as Americans and just as people in general, hence the sweeping claims made at the beginning of the Constitution. But increasingly, it seems like people want to, both in education and in government, want to, rather than being taught by the Constitution, want to sort of teach it, anachronistically reading their own understandings and their own ideologies, I suppose, into the document. So how do you think civic education can either reverse or overcome that, or can it?
Boy, I don't really understand your question. Can you?
Yeah, of course. So how can we, receiving a civic education, or just America in general, use the Constitution to potentially overcome the tendency to, instead of being taught by the principles contained therein, rather than projecting our own thoughts onto it?
I see what you mean. I think the Constitution, part of the problem with the idea of the Constitution as a preceptor, as something that teaches us a morality. And by the way, the Queen of England was not really much of a teacher in that way either. She was a symbol of the nation. And as such, frankly, I think she does a better job of it than her son. She is only supposed to, in the rarest of occasions, favor one partisan path over another. Above all, she stands for the unity, the cohesiveness, the sort of historical integrity of Britain, of Great Britain, of the United Kingdom. And in some ways, so she's not a teacher really, except in that sense, embodiment of that symbol. And what I was trying to do with my beginning was to say, the Constitution is what we have. We forswore, from the very beginning, we swore off the idea of having a king. George Washington said no. That was that. We weren't going to have a king. We were going to have a republic. And so then it was a question of what kind of republic? How do you have an extended republic that nevertheless holds together? How do you protect against the factionalism that tends to split republics apart? A lot of mechanical considerations are involved in what the Constitution does. It's not easy to extract a sort of moral teaching from it, although I think one does emerge. One does emerge, and it has something to do, well, I would say there's a couple of things. That one of the things, because of the Constitution respecting the existing of conflicting interests, I think we're supposed to also do that. We're supposed to fight for our interests, as you do in a court of law. The counsel for the defense fights for the defense. Prosecution goes the other way. You do that, but you do it within a system that respects an underlying order. In the courtroom, one of the reasons the attorneys can't do just whatever they want. there are definitely rules that bind them, and that they are officers of the court, which means that they also belong to the system within which the contest is taking place. So there's a kind of moral reasoning there. There's a kind of, you have to do things, you can fight like heck, but fight in the right way within the rules. And by respecting those rules, you uphold the system, which is what, in trying to do justice, is what you're trying to do. So I think the analogy holds with the Constitution. The Constitution is a structure for facilitating conflict. It really is. And this is one of the things that foreigners often have trouble understanding about the Constitution. I remember I was overseas. I was in Turkey at one point, a bunch of journalists, and they said, well, your country's falling apart because, and I said, why do you say that? And they said, well, the Congress just voted against Bush, something that Bush had done. And I said, that's the way our system works. The system is working. Now, that doesn't mean they were right to do that. It's all going to kind of come out in the process. But the idea that our system should be perfect harmony, those have been some of our worst times when we've had presidents like President Johnson, who could get anything he wanted through the Congress because he had the overwhelming majorities, and we had some of the worst legislation in our history passed. So I think the idea that you enter into politics with the idea that you may be mistaken or you may be overruled, and that's part of the system. And that there is something called, and this is something missing today, and I have to say it's missing on all sides, is the idea that there could be a loyal opposition. That is, an opposition that it's perfectly legitimate to oppose the policies of someone in power, but you do it in a way that is fundamentally loyal to the forces that put them in that office. You don't say, my opposition is so deep that I'm not going to obey the rules anymore. I'm not going to participate in politics as a citizen, but as a kind of terrorist or an outsider, as a lawless, anarchistic person. We have kind of lost this, haven't we? I mean, this notion that this is, if there's anything that higher education ought to be teaching people, it's that the necessity of a concept of the loyal opposition. And that's very constitutional, I think, that very notion.
All right, we have one last question from Anna Merritt.
Hello, thank you for your talk. Right here.
Oh, there you are, okay.
Sorry. You said one of the important aspects of getting a good civic education isn't just being taught the mechanics of the government, how it works, the different branches, but also instilling a love for that government, for that form, that constitution. And so I was wondering, just maybe on a more practical level, what are some ways that we can engender that love in students and our fellow citizens?
That's a really good question, and I'm not entirely, sure of the best answer. I think one of the things I've tried to influence in my own work is change the way history is being taught, that to understand that, especially for very young people, what really moves them, what makes them interested in the past, makes them interested in understanding it and embracing it and treating it as real, is if you have stories, if you embed that knowledge in stories. And I'm not saying tall tales or myths or anything like that. I'm talking about real stories of real people, told well, not in the antiseptic language that I'm afraid most historians use, but in vivid, novelistic language, that moves people. That's a beginning, is to make it interesting, to make it exciting. I mean, it's nothing wrong with it being fun. The notion that eating broccoli is the comparable thing to studying history is, and I happen to like broccoli actually, but that's a bad example. But it's something, taking a medicine you don't want to take. No, history, it should be delightful. As delightful as reading a science fiction novel or any kind of fiction as a movie. I think that's a beginning. And I think, everything is a question of age appropriateness. I think with education, there are certain things that are forms of repetition, like the pledge to the flag, like patriotic things that little kids love, and then they get to be a certain age, and it's kind of they resent it. Okay, that's all right. Then you move to things that are a little more substantive. But I also think, and this may be giving a little bit of ground to the Action Civics people, but I don't think it is. But let me put it this way. I think of all the things that people I know have done, other than perhaps serving in the military, that have made them have changed their view of the country for the better, is serving on a jury. I don't know whether anybody in this room has had that experience, but that is an experience really of the fundamental equality of people, the ability of any person to make judgments. You see it. You see people coming in and you think, oh my God, these are people who are going to decide the fate of this person. And it turns out that in most cases, I mean, you do hear about the people who give billion-dollar awards to a woman that burned her leg with a McDonald's coffee or something like that. There are cases like that, but for the most part, juries are very sensible. And the trial by jury is, of course, the fundament of English common law. So for people to have experiences like that, in which they're connected with the political life of their community, that's a different kind of politics than the politics of voting for president or launching national campaigns. It's much more integral to the actual life of a community. And it's a place where you can make a difference. If you run for school board, you can make a difference. And it's frustrating. Local politics can be really nasty stuff, but because people are nasty, but it can also give you a sense of what a unique gift it is to live in a country where you can have that voice and you can have that influence. So I think anything that can give young people a sense of the substantial character of their involvement in the community of citizens is a good thing. I'd like to think more about the question you've asked, because it's something I do need to think about. How do you engender love? Maybe an analogy to how you engender love in other areas of life.
All right, please join me in thanking Dr. McClay one more time.
Thank you.